My wife cheated on me with her boss, got pregnant, and then suddenly filed for divorce claiming I'm an unfit father. Now she's demanding half the house worth $750, $0 and $200, $0 in settlement. But I just found out she's been secretly draining our joint account and moving money into her sister's name for the past year. I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here, staring at my phone in disbelief, wondering how everything fell apart so fast. The strangest thing happened. One day I found out my wife, who I thought was the perfect partner, had been cheating on me with her boss, Mark. Yeah, Mark, the guy who always acted like he was better than everyone else. And the worst part, she's pregnant now, pregnant by him. Just when I thought life couldn't get any worse, she filed for divorce claiming I was an unfit father. The whole thing hit me like a freight train. We'd been married for 8 years. I met in college and she seemed perfect, smart, beautiful, ambitious. We built a life together, bought a house worth about $750, $0, had 2 kids, and I thought we were solid. But lately, I started noticing small things. She'd be secretive about her phone, locking it more often, hiding texts. She'd come home late from work, excuse it with stress or long meetings, but something felt off. She'd get defensive if I asked questions, brush me off with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Then, a couple of weeks ago, I decided to check her phone when she was in the shower. I know I probably shouldn't have, but I was just curious. What I saw was enough to make me sick. There were messages, flirty, intimate texts between her and Mark, talking about their secret meetings, plans to meet up, even explicit talk about sex. It was blatant. She'd been hiding this from me for months. And the worst part, she was proud of it, like she was doing me a favor by finally telling me she was unhappy and needed something more. That's when I started digging deeper. I found bank statements showing money transferred to her sister's account, money she'd been siphoning from our joint account for over a year. I saw charges for hotels, dinners, and gifts for Mark, things I never knew about. She'd been planning this all along, sneaking around behind my back while I was working late or taking care of the kids. I felt like I didn't know her at all. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and furious. How could she do this to me, to us? When I finally confronted her, she everything at first. Said I was paranoid, that I was imagining things. But I had proof. I laid everything out on the table, screenshots, bank statements, the texts. Her face went pale, then she started crying, acting like I was the one who was crazy, who didn't understand her needs. She said she was stressed out, that she was only with Mark because she felt neglected, that I was a terrible husband who didn't pay enough attention to her, that she was doing what she thought was best for herself. I couldn't believe it. The woman I loved, the woman I built a life with, was lying right to my face. And the more she lied, the angrier I got. I felt like I was losing my mind. I couldn't sleep. I kept asking myself how everything got so broken. How did I miss the signs? Was I just blind? I started to question everything, my worth, my judgment, even whether I should stay or walk away. But one thing was clear. She had been sneaking around, draining our savings, and now she's demanding half the house, $200, $0 in settlement, and claiming I'm an unfit father. It was like she was trying to erase everything we built, and I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let her get away with it. I started thinking about revenge, not because I'm a spiteful person, but because I felt like I'd been played for a fool. I wanted her to feel what she made me feel, betrayed, humiliated, and powerless. I needed to fight back, to show her she couldn't just walk all over me and take everything without consequences. But I had no idea how deep her lies went or how much damage she had already done. I just knew I couldn't let her walk away with my house, my money, and my kids' future without a fight. After I confronted with everything I had found, the house felt like it was caving in around me. Her initial reaction was to act innocent, to play the victim. She threw out words like stress, feeling neglected, and mistakes, as if that explained her betrayal. She kept insisting she loved me, that it was a mistake, that she never meant for it to go this far. But her tears didn't move me anymore. I was too angry, too hurt, and honestly, too disgusted to believe a word she said. I could see the lies behind her eyes. I remember sitting there, staring at her, feeling a mixture of rage and heartbreak. The woman I married, the woman I trusted with everything, had been sleeping with her boss, Mark, behind my back. She'd been lying, cheating, and stealing from us, draining our joint account, moving money into her sister's name, probably to hide what she was doing. I didn't know how long she'd been planning this, but it felt like she was trying to erase me from her life while lining her pockets. All I could think about was how she had manipulated me, how she'd turned everything upside down in just a few months. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head, her sneaking around, the secret texts, the money transfers. I felt betrayed on a level I never knew was possible. I'd always thought we were solid. We had a good life, a good marriage. And now I was sitting here realizing she'd been lying to my face for months. The thought of her carrying Mark's kid made me feel sick. I was furious at her, but also deeply hurt. How could she do this? How could she be so selfish? I'd been working hard to provide for us, and she was out there, secretly screwing her boss, planning her escape, and now she wanted half of everything we built. The next morning, I started looking into everything I could about her finances. I knew she'd been moving money around. She'd been secretly funneling cash into her sister's account, probably to hide it from me. I found bank statements showing transfers of thousands of dollars, some of which I never authorized. I also discovered that she'd been taking money from our joint account for over a year, which explained how she could afford all these secret trips, gifts for Mark, and the hotel stays. The more I looked, the more I realized she'd been planning this for a long time. I felt like I'd always trusted her, always believed we were in this thing together. But now I saw her for what she really was, a liar, a thief, and a cheater. I started to think about what I needed to do next. I knew she'd be demanding a lot, especially with her lawyer now involved. She wanted the house, which she claimed was half mine, and a $200, $0 settlement. Honestly, I didn't care about the money at first. I just wanted her out of my life, out of my house, and away from my kids. But then I realized how much she'd already taken, her secret money moves, her lies, her betrayal, and I knew I had to fight back. I decided I needed a plan. I couldn't let her get away with this. I started talking to a lawyer, gathering evidence of her financial deception, and exploring my options. I knew she'd try to spin everything to paint herself as the victim, but I had proof. I also started thinking about how to protect my kids from the fallout. I didn't want them to be caught in the middle of this mess, but I knew their future was at stake. I felt helpless, furious, and determined all at once. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about standing up for myself, about making sure she couldn't just walk away with everything she wanted while I was left to pick up the pieces. I also realized I had to be prepared for her to do anything. She was manipulative, and I suspected she might try to turn the kids against me or make me seem like the bad guy in her version of the story. I was already bracing myself for a legal battle, for her lies, and for the emotional that was coming. But one thing was clear: I couldn't trust her anymore. Not one bit. And I knew I had to be smarter, tougher, and more prepared than she expected. Because if she thought she was going to walk all over me, she'd better think again. Once I started digging into her financials, it became obvious that I'd been planning this betrayal for months. She was sneaky, transferring money into her sister's account, hiding receipts, and making sure her tracks were covered. I found enough evidence to prove she'd been draining our joint account steadily over the past year, funneling thousands of dollars into her sister's name. I also uncovered charges for hotels, dinners, and gifts, things she never mentioned or admitted to. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a reckless affair. It was a carefully orchestrated plan to leave me with nothing. I felt a mix of rage and helplessness. How could she do this? How could she lie to my face, pretend everything was fine, while secretly planning her escape? I was angry at her, sure, but mostly I felt betrayed, completely betrayed. I used to think I knew her, but now I saw her for what she really was: a manipulative, dishonest woman who was willing to cheat, steal, and lie just to get what she wanted. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the pile of evidence I'd collected. Her texts with Mark, the bank statements, the secret transfers, they all screamed betrayal. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind. I kept asking myself how I missed the signs. I thought we had a good marriage, but apparently she'd been hiding her true self all along. I felt sick knowing she'd been sleeping with her boss, getting pregnant by him, and then trying to cover it all up with a fake divorce plan. She was trying to erase me from her life to start fresh with Mark and her baby while I was left holding the bag. My mind raced with questions. How much had she taken? How long had she been planning this? Was she planning to leave me completely, or was she just trying to get a bigger settlement? I knew she'd demand half the house, which was worth about $750, $0 and $200, $0 in settlement. She'd probably argue that she deserved it because she was an unfit mother, which was such a lie I almost laughed. She'd always been bitchy and manipulative, and now she was using her pregnancy as a weapon. I also started thinking about the legal side. I had a good case for the financial deception, but I knew she'd spin the story to make herself look like the victim. She'd say I was an absentee husband, neglectful, unfaithful, things I knew weren't true. But I also knew her enough to realize she'd do anything to win, even if it meant lying under oath or twisting facts. That's when I decided I needed to be strategic. I contacted a lawyer the next day, gathering all my evidence, and explained what I knew. It was clear she was trying to manipulate the situation, but I wasn't going down without a fight. I told my lawyer about her secret money transfers, her false accusations about my parenting, and her attempts to hide her affair. I also made it clear I wasn't going to be bullied or manipulated into giving her what she wanted. I was prepared to fight for full custody of the kids, for my rights, and for what was fair. I knew this was going to be a long battle, but I was ready. I'd been betrayed, yes, but I wasn't going to let her take everything without a fight. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that's real goal was to get as much as she could, to walk away with a clean slate while I was left to pick up the pieces. She'd already drained our savings, lied to my face, and now she was trying to turn the situation around to her favor. I felt like a fool for trusting her, but I also knew I had to stay strong. I couldn't let her win, not like this. In the end, I decided I'd do whatever it took to expose her lies, protect my kids, and get what I deserved. I wasn't going to let her manipulate the system or use her pregnancy as a weapon. I knew she'd try to spin her story in her favor, but I had the evidence, and I was determined to fight for my rights. This was just the beginning of a very ugly legal battle, but I was ready to face whatever came next. I'd been betrayed once. I wasn't going to let her betray me again. The days that followed were a blur of lawyer meetings, frantic calls, and digging through every piece of financial paper I could find. Of course, started her spin. She told friends and family I was an unfit father, neglectful of the kids, and that I was somehow responsible for her affair with Mark. She claimed I was distant, that I didn't care enough, and that she was only doing what she had to do to find happiness. It made me sick to hear her twist everything, but I knew her game. She was trying to sway opinions to make herself look innocent while hiding her true motives. I couldn't believe how manipulative she was being. She's always been bitchy, but now she was downright ruthless. She'd call me constantly, crying, accusing me of ruining everything, acting as if she was the victim. She'd text the kids, telling them I didn't love them and that she was the only one who cared. I could see her trying to turn them against me, to make me the bad guy in her story. But I refused to fall into that trap. I stayed calm, focused on the evidence, and prepared for the fight ahead. Meanwhile, I kept an eye on the financial situation. I hired a forensic accountant to trace all the money she'd been moving. It turned out she'd transferred over $50, $0 into her sister's account over the past year. That's a lot of money to just disappear. I also discovered she'd been secretly withdrawing cash from our joint account, hundreds, sometimes thousands at a time, probably to hide her expenses or to give her a head start in the escape plan. It was clear she'd been planning this for months, maybe even longer. I sat down with my lawyer and showed him everything. We prepared for a court battle, filing for custody and asking for a full accounting of her financial activities. I wanted to prove she'd been hiding assets and draining our savings. I also wanted to show the court that she was unfit as a mother, mainly because of her lies and her manipulative behavior. I knew she'd try to claim I was an unfit father, but I had a good relationship with the kids, and I was ready to fight for custody. The most shocking thing was when I found out she was claiming she was pregnant with Mark's child. She told everyone she was expecting his baby and that I should accept it because it's what's best for everyone. That was her way of forcing the divorce, making it seem like she was the victim of my supposed neglect. I was furious. I knew she was using the pregnancy to manipulate the situation, to get sympathy and to push her agenda. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it, not without a fight. One night I decided I needed to confront her directly, face to face. I told her I knew about the money transfers, the secret accounts, and her lies. I told her I had enough evidence to prove she'd been planning this for months. Her face twisted into a mask of anger. She yelled everything and then started crying again, claiming I was trying to ruin her life. But I wasn't about to let her manipulate me anymore. I told her I was done playing her game, that I was going to fight for my rights and for the truth. She responded by saying she'd take everything, half the house, the settlement, everything she could get. She claimed she deserved it because she was doing what was best for her and the baby. That was her big lie, trying to make me feel guilty, trying to turn the tables. But I knew better. I knew her true intent was just to walk away with as much as she could, leaving me with nothing. I wasn't going to let that happen. I had the evidence, I had the law on my side, and I was ready to fight for what was fair. I also started planning how to protect the kids from the fallout. I didn't want them caught in the crossfire of her lies and manipulation. I arranged for a family counselor, hoping to keep some stability for them. I knew would do everything she could to turn them against me, but I was determined to be there for them, no matter what. I realized that this wasn't just about money or revenge anymore. It was about their future, about making sure they weren't used as pawns in her game. As the legal process moved forward, I felt a strange mix of anger and relief. Anger because I'd been betrayed so badly, and relief because I finally had some control over the situation. I'd uncovered her lies, and I was ready to fight for my rights. I knew she'd continue to lie, manipulate, and try to win her way, but I wasn't going to give up. I'd been burned, yes, but I was also determined to come out of this stronger. I just hoped that in the end the truth would prevail, and I could rebuild what she tried to destroy. Over the next couple of weeks, everything escalated fast. His lawyer sent a formal response to my filings, claiming I was an absentee father, neglectful, and unfit, basically trying to paint me as the villain. She even went so far as to accuse me of emotional abuse, which was so absurd I almost laughed. I knew her game was to discredit me, to weaken my case for custody, and to make herself look like the victim. But I had solid evidence on my side: texts, financial records, witnesses. I had nothing to hide. Meanwhile's behavior became more erratic. She was still trying to control the narrative, posting vague, emotional messages on social media about being misunderstood, fighting for her happiness, and doing what's best for the baby. She even started accusing me of trying to keep her trapped, which honestly was laughable. I was just trying to get my fair share and protect my kids, not some evil mastermind. But she was desperate, and her desperation made her more manipulative. Her demands for the house and settlement kept coming. She insisted she deserved half the value of the house, claiming she'd contributed equally, even though she'd been secretly draining our savings and lying to my face. I knew I had to stand firm. I also started to realize she was trying to leverage her pregnancy to sway the court, saying she needed stability for the baby, that I was unfit, that she couldn't be with someone who didn't support her. I knew that was her way of trying to get the upper hand, but I wasn't going to let her manipulate the system. One day, I caught her in a lie that floored me. She told her family that I'd been cheating on her, which I found hilarious because I'd never done anything like that. But she was desperate to turn everyone against me. I had to be careful, though, because I knew she'd try to use her pregnancy as a shield or weapon. I decided to get a paternity test just to be safe. If she was going to use the baby as a pawn, I had to make sure I knew the truth. When the results came back, and I knew they would, it confirmed what I already suspected. I was the father and Mark wasn't involved. That was a small victory, but it felt good to have the truth on my side. Throughout all this chaos, I kept focusing on the kids. I arranged supervised visits, made sure they knew I loved them, and tried to keep things as normal as possible. I didn't want them to see the worst of the mess, but I also knew was trying to manipulate them. Tell them I didn't care, that I was leaving them, and that I was a bad father. I couldn't let her succeed. I spent hours talking to a counselor about how to handle her lies and keep the kids grounded. It was exhausting, but I knew I had to stay strong for them. The emotional toll was enormous. I felt betrayed, angry, and confused all at once. I kept asking myself how I'd missed the signs, how I'd been so blind to her true nature. But I also realized I had to accept that I couldn't change her, only myself. I started to focus on what I could control: my actions, my feelings, my future. I spent more time with my friends, leaned on my family, and tried to stay grounded amid the chaos. I knew this was just the beginning of a long fight, but I was determined not to lose myself in the process. One night, I sat alone in my room, looking at the photos of us, our wedding, family vacations, the kids' birthdays, and I felt a strange mix of sadness and resolve. I loved those memories, but I knew I had to let go of the illusion that everything was perfect. Betrayal changed everything, but it also made me realize I had to rebuild, stronger and more aware. I wasn't going to let her destroy me or our family without a fight. Whatever came next, I was ready. I owed it to myself, and most of all, to my kids. The court date finally arrived after months of legal battles, lies, and emotional exhaustion. Lawyers tried every trick in the book, smearing my name, claiming I was unfit, twisting facts to fit her narrative. But I had my evidence, and I was prepared. I knew she'd do anything to win, but I also knew the truth was on my side. When I sat in that courtroom, looking across at her, I felt a strange calm. I had done everything I could to protect my rights, my kids, and my sanity. The judge listened carefully to both sides. I presented the financial records, proof of her secret money transfers, her attempts to hide assets, her lies about my parenting. I also provided evidence of her manipulative behavior, including texts where she blatantly lied and tried to turn the kids against me. The lawyer argued her case, but the judge was attentive, skeptical of her claims. I could see it in her eyes. She knew she was losing control. In the end, the court ruled in my favor on most points. The judge ordered an equitable division of assets, awarding her only a small portion of the house's value, less than she demanded. My lawyer also argued convincingly for full custody of the kids, citing her financial deception and manipulative tendencies. The judge agreed that was unfit to have primary custody, especially given her ongoing lies and her attempts to manipulate the situation. The court awarded me primary custody, with supervised visits for which she protested loudly, but there was no denying the evidence. When I left the courtroom that day, a huge weight was lifted. I felt relief mixed with sadness, sadness for the broken marriage, for the betrayal, for the family we once had. But I also felt a deep sense of justice. I had fought for my rights, for the truth, and for my children's future. Lies and manipulations couldn't undo what the court had decided, and I knew I could start rebuilding from here. In the aftermath, I focused on healing. I worked on repairing my relationship with the kids, making sure they felt loved and safe despite the chaos. I also moved out of the house, which I sold for a fair price, and started fresh in a new place. Attempts to manipulate the situation continued for a while, but her influence waned as she realized I was serious about protecting my family and my rights. Looking back, I've learned a lot from this nightmare. Trust is fragile, and sometimes people hide their true selves behind a smile. Betrayal cuts deep, especially when it's coming from someone you loved and trusted with everything. But I also learned resilience. I discovered that even when everything falls apart, you can pick yourself up, fight for what's right, and come out the other side stronger. To anyone reading this who might be going through something similar, know that you're not alone. Trust your instincts, gather your evidence, and stand your ground. The truth has a way of coming out, and justice, even if slow, will prevail. Most importantly, take care of yourself and your kids. They deserve stability, honesty, and love, especially in the aftermath of betrayal. I may have lost a marriage, but I gained clarity, strength, and a renewed sense of purpose. And that, in the end, is what truly matters.